I was in Paris, restoring a 19th century masterpiece, when my parents secretly sold my studio to fund my brother's doomed tech startup. When I confronted them upon my return, they smirked and told me I could paint my little pictures anywhere. I did not scream or cry. I simply smiled. "What is so funny?" my father demanded. I replied, "Because the building you just sold actually belonged to the federal government." They froze. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Naomi, 33 years old, and I work as a senior art conservator and appraiser. Growing up in our affluent suburban neighborhood meant constantly living in the shadow of impossible expectations. My parents, Richard and Barbara, measured human value strictly by corporate titles and bank accounts. They saw my career in art restoration as nothing more than a frivolous hobby, a glorified coloring book project for a woman who refused to get a real job. To them, I was the family disappointment. The golden child was my older brother, Cameron. At 35, Cameron was a walking cliché of a tech bro who had never actually built a successful company. He spoke exclusively in buzzwords about artificial intelligence and disruption, while bleeding our parents dry to fund his flashy lifestyle. I had just spent 3 weeks in France consulting with a private collector. I was exhausted from the 14-hour flight but eager to get back to my studio. My workspace was located in a rapidly gentrifying industrial district. It was my sanctuary. But the exhaustion deep in my bones vanished the second my taxi pulled up to the curb. I stepped out onto the pavement and stared in absolute disbelief. The heavy steel door of my studio had been altered. The vintage brass lock I had installed myself was gone, replaced by a cheap modern deadbolt. A massive real estate sign was staked into the small patch of grass out front, with the word "sold" plastered across it in bold red letters. My stomach plummeted, but the real horror was sitting by the curb. A commercial dumpster was overflowing with my life. My custom sable brushes were snapped in half. Imported European solvents were leaking onto the pavement, ruining everything they touched. Antique frames I had spent months sourcing were cracked and splintered like worthless firewood. I stood there taking in the destruction of my livelihood. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for people who had something left to lose. I felt a cold and absolute rage settle into my chest because I knew exactly who had done this. I hailed another taxi and gave the driver my parents' address. As the car sped toward their pristine 5-bedroom colonial home, I prepared myself for the confrontation. I marched up the manicured walkway and did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy oak double doors open and stepped into the foyer. The sound of clinking crystal and loud laughter drifted from the formal dining room. I walked in to find a full celebration underway. My father, Richard, was pouring expensive champagne into crystal flutes. My mother, Barbara, wore her best pearls, beaming with a pride she had never once directed at me. Cameron stood at the head of the table, holding up his glass, looking as arrogant as ever. Sitting quietly next to him was his wife, Nia. Nia was an African-American woman with a razor-sharp mind who worked as a chief financial officer for a major corporation. She was the only person in this room who actually worked hard for a living. Her expression was tight, and she did not raise her glass to join their ridiculous toast. My father noticed me first. He did not look guilty or ashamed. He just looked annoyed that I had interrupted his party. "Naomi," he said, setting the champagne bottle down on the mahogany table. "We did not expect you back from France until tomorrow." I tossed the rusted remains of my broken studio lock onto the dining table. It hit the polished wood with a loud thud. "Someone changed the locks on my property," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Someone also threw thousands of dollars of specialized restoration equipment into a dumpster. Care to explain why there is a sold sign on my building?" My mother stepped forward, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Naomi. We sold that old brick eyesore. It was practically falling apart anyway." "You sold my building?" I asked, taking a slow step closer. "The building I bought with my own money, the building where I run my business." It was not a real business, my father chimed in, crossing his arms defensively. You play with old paint and dust all day. Your brother needed real capital for his new startup. He is building an artificial intelligence platform that is going to change the world. He needed a headquarters and seed money. We did what any supportive family would do. We consolidated our assets. Cameron smirked, taking a slow sip of his champagne. Look on the bright side, sis, he said condescendingly. When my company goes public, I will buy you a brand new box of crayons. You can paint anywhere. You do not need a whole warehouse for your little arts and crafts. I stared at the three of them, letting the sheer audacity of their delusions sink in. They had completely bypassed my ownership. They had forged a power of attorney using my father's old access to my legal documents from years ago when I foolishly trusted him. They had sold my property right out from under me while I was in Europe, assuming I was just a starving artist who would eventually fold under their pressure and accept the loss. They assumed wrong. They had no idea that my quiet little arts and crafts business generated 7 figures a year working with national museums. But most importantly, they had no idea what they had actually done. I looked at Nia, who was watching me carefully. She knew her husband was a fraud, but even she looked shocked by the revelation that they had stolen and sold my property to fund his delusion. How much did you get for it? I asked, keeping my face completely blank. $1.2 million, my mother said proudly, fluffing her pearls. The real estate developers wired it directly to Cameron's business account yesterday. It is the perfect seed round. Now he can finally hire his development team. I nodded, slowly processing their confession. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that made my mother step back slightly. What is so funny? My father demanded, his face flushing with sudden anger. You just lost your studio and you are smiling like a lunatic. I am smiling, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, because that studio was not mine to sell anymore, and it certainly was not yours. The room went dead silent. The champagne flutes stopped halfway to their mouths. What are you talking about? Cameron asked, his arrogant smirk finally faltering. I bought that warehouse 3 years ago, I explained, keeping my eyes locked on my father. But 6 months ago, the Department of Transportation finalized their new infrastructure plan. They claimed eminent domain on that entire block for the new highway expansion. The state bought that building from me for $5 million. I was only leasing it back for $1 a month until my new facility was ready. I leaned over the table, looking directly into my father's pale face. You did not just forge documents to steal from your daughter. You just committed wire fraud and sold a piece of property that belongs to the United States government. The FBI is going to absolutely love this. My mother picked up her crystal glass. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her vintage Pinot Noir, leaving a faint red stain on the rim. She did not look like a woman who had just committed a felony. She looked like a woman who had simply rearranged the living room furniture. I threw the rusted broken padlock onto the center of the dining table. It hit the polished mahogany with a sharp crack, scratching the expensive wood. My mother flinched but quickly recovered her perfectly contoured face, settling into an expression of profound annoyance. You are ruining the celebration, Naomi, my mother said. She waved her manicured hand as if swatting away a fly. We sold that old brick eyesore. It was practically falling apart anyway. You never even invited us there, so why should you care? You sold a building that you do not own, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. I bought that studio 3 years ago. My name is on the deed. How exactly did you manage to sell my property while I was in Paris? My father, Richard, leaned back in his custom leather chair. He crossed his arms over his chest, puffing out like a silverback gorilla defending its territory. He looked at me with the same condescending glare he had used since I was 7 years old. Do not use that tone with your mother, he barked. We are a family and families share resources. Your mother simply found that old power of attorney you signed for us 5 years ago. You remember the one we needed when you were backpacking through Europe and we had to handle your mail. She just made a few necessary adjustments to the dates. The real estate agent is a friend of mine from the country club. He pushed the paperwork through quickly, without asking too many complicated questions. I stared at him. I literally could not comprehend the sheer audacity. "You committed forgery," I stated. "You committed real estate fraud." "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Naomi," my mother chimed in. She rolled her eyes and reached for the caviar. "You are always playing the victim. It is just a piece of paper. Your brother needed real capital for his new startup. He is building an artificial intelligence platform that is going to change the world. He needed a headquarters and seed money. We did what any supportive family would do. We consolidated our underperforming assets." Underperforming assets. I repeated the words, tasting bitter on my tongue. "Yes," your father intervened. "You play with old paint and dust all day. You restore old pictures for pennies. What do you make a year? 40,000. 50,000 tops. It is a cute little hobby, but it is not a real career." Cameron, on the other hand, is building the future. He is creating an enterprise. He needed liquidity fast to lock in his software developers. The buyers offered $1.2 million in cash for that commercial lot. I signed the closing documents on Tuesday and wired the entire $1.2 million straight into Cameron's business account. Every single cent. Brothers and sisters should help each other. Why are you being so calculative? I shifted my gaze to my brother. Cameron was 35, but he still acted like a frat boy who thought the world owed him a favor. He was wearing a designer turtleneck that probably cost more than my first car. He swirled the champagne in his glass, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. "Look on the bright side, sis," Cameron said smoothly. "When my company goes public and hits $1 billion valuation, I will buy you a brand new box of crayons. I might even throw in a new easel. But right now, I needed that money more than you needed a dusty warehouse to hide in." "You stole my property, Cameron," I said, my voice icy. "You stole $1.2 million. I did not steal anything." He laughed. "Mom and Dad handled the logistics. I just received the investment. Besides, you can paint anywhere. Go clean out Dad's garage and set up your little canvases there. Or go rent a cheap storage unit in the suburbs. You do not need prime commercial real estate for your arts and crafts. Be a team player for once in your life, Naomi." The gaslighting was so intense, it felt like the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. I had spent my entire life enduring this exact dynamic. If Cameron failed a test, the teachers were biased. If I won a national art competition, I was just wasting time on a useless subject. And now they had escalated from emotional abuse to grand larceny, and they were sitting around eating caviar acting like I was the villain for being upset. "You are incredibly selfish, Naomi." My mother sighed loudly. She shook her head, acting deeply wounded. "Your brother is on the verge of becoming the next tech visionary. He is under so much pressure to succeed. And instead of supporting him, you come storming in here yelling about a useless building. We gave you life. We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You should be thanking us for allowing you to contribute to the family portfolio." I looked at Nia, my sister-in-law. She was sitting rigidly next to Cameron. As an African-American woman who had fought tooth and nail to become a corporate chief financial officer, Nia knew the law inside and out. She knew exactly what forgery and wire fraud looked like. She had not touched her champagne. She had not said a single word since I walked in. She avoided my gaze, staring intensely at her plate, but I saw her jaw clench tight enough to crack teeth. She knew her husband was a complete fraud, and she knew this family was entirely unhinged. I turned my attention back to my father. "You wired the money directly to his account?" I asked, making sure I had the details perfectly straight. "Every penny," my father said proudly. "And we have already signed the transfer deeds. The developers are tearing that old building down next week to build luxury condos, so do not even think about trying to reverse the sale. It is done, Naomi. Grow up and accept it. If you cause a scene and embarrass this family, I will make sure you are cut out of our will entirely. You will cut me out of the will I asked." "Yes," my mother snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "We will cut you off completely. You have always been the difficult child. You have never fit in. You refused to study business, you refused to marry a respectable man, and now you are trying to ruin your brother's big day. You are a useless, selfish girl who only cares about herself. I stood there in the opulent dining room, surrounded by the people who shared my blood. They were so confident in their manipulation. They were so absolutely certain that I was the weak, timid girl who would just swallow her anger and walk away crying. They thought they had cornered me. They thought they had won. They had no idea that my quiet little arts and crafts business generated 7 figures a year. They did not know that I worked directly with national museums and billionaire private collectors. But most importantly, they had no idea what they had actually sold. I took a deep breath. The anger in my chest suddenly dissolved into pure, cold amusement. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally at my arrogant brother. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that made my mother step back slightly. "What is so funny?" my father demanded, his face flushing with sudden anger. "You just lost your studio and you are smiling like a lunatic." "I am not a lunatic, Richard," I said, leaning forward slightly and placing my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. "I am simply a woman who appreciates the supreme irony of this entire situation. For 33 years you have all called me a failure. You called my profession a cute little hobby. You assumed I was just scraping by playing with old paint. But what you failed to realize while you were so busy worshipping Cameron and his imaginary tech empire is that my clients are billionaires and national museums. My arts and crafts business netted $3 million last year alone." My mother scoffed, but her voice lacked its previous confidence. "Stop making up ridiculous numbers, Naomi. We know exactly what your bank account looks like." "You know what my college checking account looked like, Barbara?" I corrected, using her first name to shatter the maternal illusion. "The account you had access to. You know absolutely nothing about my corporate accounts or my real estate portfolio." Which brings me to the actual reason I am smiling. The dining room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the central air conditioning. Cameron shifted in his seat, his designer turtleneck suddenly looking a bit too tight around his collar. "You see," I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room, "that studio in the industrial district, the one you just sold for $1.2 million to your buddy from the country club. I do not own it anymore. I have not owned it for over 6 months." My father frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. "What are you talking about?" "We have the deed. We processed the transfer. The title company cleared it. They cleared a forged document submitted by a desperate man I shot back. 6 months ago, the State Department of Transportation finalized their urban infrastructure expansion project. They invoked eminent domain on that entire block. The federal government acquired that exact building from me. And because of the historical value of the structure and the prime location, they compensated me very generously. $5 million to be exact. The money cleared my accounts in October. My mother gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "No," she whispered. "No, that is impossible." "It is public record," I stated calmly. "Check the county registry if you do not believe me." The state gave me a grace period to safely pack and transport my highly sensitive restoration equipment and the antique artworks I was holding for my clients. I signed an agreement allowing me to lease the building back from the government for exactly $1 a month until the end of this week. I watched the color drain completely from my father's face. The arrogant silverback gorilla posture deflated in an instant, leaving behind a pale, sweating old man. "Do you understand what you have done?" I asked, tilting my head. "You did not just steal from your daughter. You did not just forge a power of attorney to execute a shady family transaction. You fraudulently sold a piece of property that currently belongs to the United States government. You took $1.2 million from a real estate developer for land he can never legally own or develop." "That is not true," Cameron stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher. Dad, you checked the paperwork right. You said it was clean. I checked the old deed, my father mumbled, staring blankly at the table. I did not run a new title search. Greg at the country club said he would handle the escrow internally to save us on fees and taxes since it was a private cash sale. So Greg bypassed standard legal protocols to help you commit a felony, I said, letting out a short, sharp laugh. That is fantastic. I am sure the federal investigators will love hearing about Greg and his internal escrow process. My mother dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending expensive wine and glass shards flying everywhere. Nobody moved to clean it up. You have to fix this, Naomi, my mother gasped, suddenly sounding breathless. You have to call the state. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we made a clerical error. A clerical error, I repeated, mocking her exact tone from earlier. A clerical error that resulted in $1.2 million being wired across state lines into Cameron's corporate account. That is called wire fraud, Barbara. Forging a legal document to sell federal land is grand larceny. The FBI does not consider those to be clerical errors. They consider them federal crimes carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences. Naya, who had been sitting like a statue, finally moved. She slowly reached for her purse on the floor, her eyes locked on Cameron with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She was a chief financial officer. She knew exactly how deep this hole was, and she clearly had no intention of jumping into it with them. Cameron jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward. "We will just give the money back," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "We will wire the cash back to Greg tomorrow morning. We will tear up the contracts. No harm done. You do not need to call the police, Naomi. We will just reverse it." I looked at my golden child brother, the brilliant tech CEO who was supposed to change the world. I looked at him with nothing but pity. "Reverse it?" I asked. "How exactly do you plan to do that, Cameron?" "I will just wire the $1.2 million back to the developer's account," he insisted, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "The funds are sitting in my startup account right now." I kept my eyes locked on his panicking face. "Are they, Cameron? Are the funds really just sitting there untouched? Because from what I understand about your incredibly innovative artificial intelligence startup, you have a lot of outstanding debts. Debts that were immediately automatically deducted the second that massive deposit hit your accounts." Cameron froze. His eyes widened in absolute terror. I turned my back on them and walked slowly toward the grand double doors of the foyer. The celebration was officially over. The champagne had gone flat, and the truth was finally out. I stopped with my hand on the brass doorknob and looked over my shoulder one last time. "You always said I needed to be more realistic, Dad," I said quietly. "So let us be realistic. By tomorrow morning, the real estate developer is going to realize he bought a worthless forged deed to federal land. By tomorrow afternoon, the bank is going to flag a fraudulent $1.2 million wire transfer. And by tomorrow evening, the federal authorities are going to start asking questions about who forged my signature. Enjoy your startup capital, Cameron. You are going to need every penny of it for your defense attorneys." I had my hand on the heavy brass doorknob, ready to pull it open and walk into the cool evening air. Before I could turn the latch, my father lunged across the foyer. His heavy leather shoes pounded against the marble tiles. He slammed his hand flat against the wood right above my head, physically barring my exit. "Naomi, you are not leaving this house," he barked. The smell of expensive champagne and stale fear rolled off his breath. "We are going to sit down like rational adults and figure a way out of this mess." I did not step back. I stood my ground and looked up into his bloodshot eyes. "There is no we in this equation, Richard. You created a federal crime. You get to figure the way out of it." My mother rushed into the foyer, her heels clicking frantically. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into my skin. "We can fix this," she said, her voice pitching into a manic high frequency. "You just need to sign a piece of paper, a retroactive authorization. We can date it back to last month. You can tell the real estate agent and the bank that you gave your father verbal permission to handle the transaction. It is a simple administrative fix." I stared at her hand on my arm until she slowly let go. You want me to sign a retroactive authorization for a building I do not legally own? I asked, letting the sheer stupidity of her request echo in the grand foyer. You want me to lie to federal investigators and tell them I gave you permission to sell state property to a private developer? You want me to make myself a co-conspirator in your grand larceny? You are twisting the narrative, Barbara insisted, tears of pure manipulation welling in her eyes. It is just a white lie to protect your family. We are your blood, Naomi. You cannot possibly send your own father and your own brother to prison over a piece of brick and mortar. Cameron had slinked out of the dining room and was standing in the hallway behind them. He looked like a frightened child hiding behind his parents' skirts. Come on, Naomi, he whined. You just said you got $5 million from the government. You are rich now. Why do you even care about the $1.2 million? Just sign the paper and let me keep the startup funds. If I lose this money, my company is dead. My investors will sue me. I looked at the golden child of the family. He had literally stolen from me, and he still thought he was the victim. Your company was dead the second you decided to build it on stolen money, Cameron, I said coldly. And the fact that you think my $5 million somehow excuses your theft is exactly why you will never succeed in the real world. I worked for my money. I built a highly specialized conservation firm from scratch while you all mocked me. I earned that government payout. You earned nothing. My father slammed his fist against the door again. Stop being a selfish brat, he roared. We gave you everything. We clothed you and fed you. You owe us this. If you do not sign that paper, you are dead to us. We will disown you. We will tell everyone in our social circle that you are a vindictive, unstable girl who tried to ruin her brother's life out of pure jealousy. I could not help but laugh. It was a harsh, grating sound. Disown me, I asked. You disowned me emotionally decades ago. You spent my entire life making sure I knew I was a disappointment. You treated my passion like a disease. And now that you realize my passion made me a millionaire, you demand that I risk federal prison to shield your precious son from his own catastrophic stupidity. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my smartphone. What are you doing? My mother shrieked, lunging forward again. Put that away! I unlocked the screen and held the phone up so they could all see the contact name. I pressed the call button and switched it to speakerphone. The dialing tone echoed loudly in the tense foyer. My father lunged for the phone, but I stepped back smoothly, dodging his grasping hands. Touch me, Richard, and I will add assault to your list of charges, I warned. The line connected. A crisp, professional voice answered. Law offices of Harrison and Associates. This is David speaking. How can I help you tonight, Naomi? Hello, David, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my terrified parents. I need you to file an emergency injunction and contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. I have just discovered that my father Richard and my brother Cameron have committed wire fraud. They forged a power of attorney and fraudulently sold the studio property that was acquired by the Department of Transportation. The stolen funds total $1.2 million and have been transferred into Cameron's corporate accounts. My mother let out a strangled wail and collapsed onto the marble floor, weeping hysterically. Cameron backed away until he hit the hallway wall, sliding down it with his head in his hands. Understood, Naomi, my lawyer replied, his tone shifting to absolute serious business. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to any verbal terms. I will contact the authorities and draft the affidavits right now. Are you in a safe location? I am leaving the premises right now, I said. I will meet you at your office in 30 minutes. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. The silence in the foyer was broken only by my mother's theatrical sobbing. I looked at my father, who was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and absolute terror. He finally realized that the quiet girl who used to seek his approval was gone forever. This is the last time you will ever speak to me, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Do not call my phone. Do not show up at my apartment. Do not try to contact my business partners. If I see any of you near me, I will have you arrested for harassment before the federal agents even get to you. You are no longer my family. You are just criminals waiting for a court date." I glanced past my sobbing mother and saw Nia standing quietly by the dining room archway. The chief financial officer had watched the entire exchange without saying a single word to defend her husband. She met my gaze and gave a barely perceptible nod. She knew exactly what was coming next, and she was already calculating her own exit strategy. I knew I would be hearing from her soon. I reached out, grabbed the brass handle, and shoved the heavy oak door open. The cool evening breeze washed over my face instantly, clearing away the suffocating toxic air of that house. I stepped out onto the porch and walked down the perfectly manicured brick pathway. I heard my father scream my name one last time, begging me to come back and negotiate. I did not break my stride. I did not look back. I simply walked toward my waiting taxi, feeling lighter and more powerful than I had ever felt in my entire 33 years of existence. I was finally free. The morning sun was barely cresting over the city skyline when the heavy pounding started on my apartment door. I was sitting at my kitchen island, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and a stack of printed legal documents in the other. My lawyer David had been working through the night coordinating with the federal authorities. I anticipated backlash from my family. I expected angry voicemails or pathetic attempts at emotional manipulation. What I did not expect was to look through my peephole and see two uniformed police officers standing in my hallway. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My expression remained perfectly neutral. "Good morning, officers," I said smoothly. "How can I help you?" The taller officer rested his hand near his utility belt, looking at me with a mixture of caution and confusion. "Are you Naomi?" he asked. "We received an emergency wellness check call from your brother Cameron. He stated that you are currently experiencing a severe schizophrenic break. He claimed you went off your medication last night, showed up at your parents' house screaming delusions about the FBI, and threatened to physically harm your family if they did not give you money." I did not gasp. I did not act outraged. I simply took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the sheer desperation of Cameron's tactic wash over me. The golden boy was terrified of federal prison. He thought if he could paint me as a mentally unstable lunatic, the authorities would dismiss my wire fraud claims as the ramblings of a sick woman. It was a classic narcissistic survival strategy: strike first and discredit the victim. I set my mug down and calmly walked over to my entryway console. I retrieved my driver's license and a glossy business card, handing both to the officers. "I am perfectly fine, officers," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I do not have schizophrenia, and I do not take any psychiatric medication. What I do have is a brother who just committed grand larceny by forging a power of attorney to sell property that belongs to the Department of Transportation. My lawyer and I initiated a federal investigation against him last night. He is using you to harass and discredit a witness." The officers exchanged a long, knowing look. They scrutinized my pristine apartment, my calm demeanor, and the thick stack of legal paperwork sitting on my kitchen island. The taller officer sighed, handing my identification back. "I apologize for the intrusion, ma'am," he said, his tone shifting from cautious to deeply apologetic. "Unfortunately, people use emergency services for retaliatory disputes more often than you would think. We will document that you are safe and sound, and we will be having a very stern conversation with your brother about filing false police reports." I thanked them and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was immediately followed by the frantic buzzing of my cell phone. David was calling. "Naomi, you need to check your email right now," David said, his voice tight with urgency. "Cameron is not just calling the police. He is weaponizing his tech network against you. He has launched a massive coordinated smear campaign online." I opened my laptop and felt my jaw clench. Cameron knew my entire career relied heavily on my immaculate reputation. In the world of high-end art, conservation trust is the only currency that matters. Billionaire collectors and National Museum curators do not hand over priceless historical artifacts to people with questionable backgrounds. Cameron had tapped into his network of low-level tech associates to flood social media and art industry forums with fabricated stories. The headlines were vicious and strategically targeted. They claimed I had been unceremoniously deported from Paris just 48 hours ago. The fabricated articles alleged that I was caught attempting to steal centuries-old canvas scraps and precious pigments from a highly secure private collection. Cameron had created anonymous burner accounts to leave devastating reviews on my business pages, warning potential clients that I was a ticking time bomb suffering from severe mental illness who would destroy their priceless investments. "He is trying to burn my life to the ground before the FBI kicks his door in," I said, staring at the malicious lies flooding my screen. "He thinks if he destroys my business, I will drop the federal complaint to save my reputation." My phone beeped, indicating another incoming call. It was not David. It was Mr. Caldwell, one of my most prominent private collectors. He was scheduled to hand over a multi-million-dollar Renaissance portrait for restoration next week. I answered the call immediately, projecting absolute confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," I said. "Naomi, what on earth is going on?" Caldwell demanded, his voice sharp with anxiety. "I am waking up to anonymous emails claiming you were escorted out of a Parisian gallery by French authorities for attempted theft. They are saying you are having a mental breakdown. You know I cannot entrust my collection to someone under police investigation." I did not apologize or sound defensive. Panic breeds panic. Instead, I spoke with the cold, hard authority of a professional who was entirely in control. "Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate you calling me directly," I replied smoothly. "Those emails are completely fabricated. They are part of a malicious smear campaign orchestrated by an estranged family member who is currently under active investigation by the FBI for wire fraud and forgery. He is attempting to extort me by attacking my professional reputation. I can immediately provide you with my flight manifest, customs declarations, and a letter of commendation from the Parisian gallery director confirming my successful and completely lawful departure from France." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. The unwavering certainty in my voice seemed to break through his panic. "The FBI?" he asked, sounding stunned. "Yes," I confirmed. "My lawyer is currently coordinating with federal agents. This individual sold a property belonging to the United States government and is now attempting to silence me. I assure you my business operations are completely secure and my mental health is perfectly intact. I will forward you the documentation from Paris right now." Caldwell let out a long breath. "Good Lord, Naomi. I am so sorry you are dealing with such madness. Send me the documents. We are still on for next week. I do not let internet gossip dictate my business relationships." I hung up the phone and immediately sent the files. I spent the next 3 hours fielding similar calls from panicked clients and gallery directors. I repeated the exact same calm, factual explanation. I provided receipts. I did not hide the fact that my own brother was the culprit. Transparency was my greatest shield. By noon, the panic had subsided. My clients were horrified by my family's actions, but their trust in me remained unshaken. Just as I finished drafting a cease and desist letter with David, a text message popped up on my screen. It was from an unknown number, but the arrogant tone was unmistakable. "Drop the FBI complaint, or I destroy your entire career," the text read. "You are nothing without your reputation. I have dozens of bots ready to post worse things. Withdraw the fraud claims and I will delete the posts. Choose wisely." I stared at the glowing screen and a genuine smile spread across my face. Cameron was truly the most arrogant fool I had ever met. In his desperate panic to save himself, he had just handed me the final nail for his coffin. I took a screenshot of the extortion threat. I did not reply. I simply forwarded the image directly to David with a brief message. "Please add witness intimidation and federal extortion to my brother's growing list of charges." I hit send on the email to David, watching the extortion screenshot vanish into cyberspace. My coffee had gone completely cold, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins kept me razor sharp. The digital clock on my oven flashed 2 in the afternoon. The smear campaign was contained. My clients were secure. Cameron was out of ammunition. Or so I thought. A sharp, determined knock echoed through my apartment. I did not flinch. I walked over to the security monitor mounted by the door, expecting to see another pair of police officers or perhaps an overly ambitious investigative reporter sniffing around the forged deed story. Instead, the high-definition camera revealed a single woman standing in the hallway. It was Nia. She was wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit and holding a thick leather briefcase. Her posture was rigidly perfect. As a highly successful corporate executive, she projected an aura of absolute authority. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. We stared at each other for a brief second. I expected her to beg. I expected her to play the role of the devoted wife pleading for her husband's salvation. I expected her to ask me to drop the federal charges to spare their marriage and their social standing. "Hello, Naomi," she said, her voice crisp and entirely devoid of warmth. "I need 5 minutes of your time. May I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She walked straight to my kitchen island, ignoring the breathtaking view of the city skyline. She set her briefcase down with a heavy thud. The polished metal clasps clicked sharply as she snapped them open. I stood on the opposite side of the marble counter, crossing my arms over my chest. "If you are here to negotiate a settlement for Cameron, you are wasting your lunch break," Nia, I stated firmly. "The federal agents already have the wire fraud evidence. The extortion texts are with my lawyer. Your husband sold federal property. There is no off-ramp here. I will not withdraw the complaint." Nia did not defend him. She did not even flinch at the mention of the federal agents. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a massive stack of printed financial documents. She tossed them onto the marble island right next to my empty coffee mug. The heavy paper slid across the smooth surface, stopping just inches from my hands. "I am not here to negotiate for that parasite," Nia replied, her dark eyes flashing with a cold, calculated fury. "I am a chief financial officer, Naomi. My entire career is built on tracking assets, identifying liabilities, and eliminating bad investments. Cameron is the absolute worst investment I have ever made. I am here to cut my losses and help you bury him." I looked down at the documents. They were highlighted, indexed, and annotated with red ink. Bank statements, wire transfer logs, and investment portfolio summaries. For 5 years, I have played the supportive wife. Nia continued, pacing a short, angry line across my hardwood floor. "I paid the mortgage on our house. I paid for his extravagant networking dinners. I watched your parents treat him like the second coming of a tech messiah, while he sat on my couch playing video games and stringing together meaningless industry buzzwords. Your parents worship a man who cannot even balance a basic ledger. I tolerated his delusions because I thought he was just a harmless dreamer. I did not know he was a criminal willing to steal from his own sister." I picked up the top sheet of paper. It was a wire transfer confirmation from the real estate developer. $1.2 million. "Your parents told you he needed that money for his artificial intelligence startup," Nia said, stopping her pacing and leaning over the counter. "They said he was hiring developers and building an enterprise. Take a look at page 4. I flipped to the 4th page. My eyes scanned the highlighted rows of numbers. My breath caught slightly in my throat. There were no payroll expenses. There were no office leases. There were no software licensing fees. He did not hire a single engineer." Nia stated, her voice laced with absolute disgust. "The second that $1.2 million hit his business account, he initiated a massive transfer. $800,000 went straight into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange. He bought into a highly volatile digital coin because some anonymous guru on a forum told him it would triple in a week. He literally gambled away $800,000 of stolen federal money on internet coins." I stared at the transaction logs. It was worse than I thought. He was not just a fraud, he was an absolute idiot. "And the rest of it?" I asked, flipping to the next page. Page 7. Nia directed, pointing a sharp manicured finger at the paper. He authorized a non-refundable wire transfer for $250,000 to a luxury exotic car dealership. He placed a custom order for a Porsche 911 GT3. He wanted it painted a specific shade of metallic silver to match his brand-new executive persona. He planned to drive it to a networking event next month to prove he had finally made it. "So let me get this straight," I said, looking up from the documents, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of his stupidity. He forged my signature to steal my property. He defrauded a real estate developer. He illegally sold land owned by the Department of Transportation. And instead of even attempting to build the fake company, he promised your parents he blew $1 million on magic internet money and a sports car. Exactly, Nia replied, leaning back and crossing her arms. And when your father finds out, he will probably still blame you for not being supportive enough. That is how deeply pathological your parents are. But I am done. I packed my bags this morning. I have already retained a ruthless divorce attorney. I am freezing all our joint accounts, and I am legally separating myself from his fraudulent businesses. Nia pushed the stack of papers closer to me. I gathered these before I locked him out of the accounting software. These are his raw, unfiltered financial records. They prove unequivocally that the $1.2 million was received and immediately misappropriated for personal luxury items and high-risk gambling. There is no legitimate business. There is only a thief with an expensive shopping habit. I looked at my sister-in-law. We had never been close. My parents had always kept a wedge between me and the rest of the family, ensuring I remained an isolated outsider. But standing in my kitchen staring at the irrefutable evidence that would guarantee my brother's imprisonment, we finally understood each other perfectly. We were two incredibly successful independent women who refused to be dragged down by the toxic delusions of mediocre men. "Thank you, Nia," I said carefully, gathering the documents and placing them into a secure folder. "The federal agents are going to find this financial roadmap highly illuminating. I will make sure they know exactly who provided it, so you are entirely shielded from the fallout." Nia offered a sharp, tight smile. "Just make sure they size him correctly for his orange jumpsuit," she said, picking up her briefcase. "I will see you in court, Naomi." The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind Nia, leaving my apartment in absolute silence. I stood alone in my kitchen staring at the stack of financial documents that essentially guaranteed my brother a lengthy stay in federal prison. I placed my hands flat against the cold marble countertop, taking a deep breath to steady my racing pulse. I had the evidence. I had the upper hand. I was finally in control of the narrative my parents had twisted for over 3 decades. Then the walls of my apartment practically shook. It was not a polite knock. It was a violent, aggressive pounding that rattled the picture frames in my hallway. The sudden noise shattered the quiet tranquility of my sanctuary. I froze. My first thought was that the police had returned, or perhaps the federal agents had arrived early to take my official statement. But law enforcement officers do not try to break the door off its hinges. I moved silently across the hardwood floor, my bare feet making no sound. I approached the security monitor mounted near the entryway. The high-definition camera feed flickered to life, revealing the hallway outside. There were 2 men standing in front of my door. They did not look like detectives. They looked like professional violence dressed in poorly fitted suits. The man on the left had a thick neck, a broken nose, and eyes that stared dead ahead with cold, predatory focus. The man on the right was taller, leaner, and aggressively impatient, tapping a heavy silver ring against my doorframe. "Open the door," Naomi, the taller man, barked. His voice was muffled through the thick wood, but the menace carried perfectly. "We know you are in there. Open it now, or we make a scene that your billionaire art clients will definitely hear about." My blood ran cold. How did they know about my clients? I did not reach for the deadbolt. Instead, I pressed the intercom button, keeping a solid barrier of reinforced steel between us. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly through the hallway speaker. State your business, or I am calling building security. Security is taking a highly compensated coffee break, the taller man sneered, leaning close to the camera lens. We represent Apex Horizon Developments, the company your father and your brother sold that lovely piece of industrial real estate to. My heart pounded against my ribs. The country club buddies my father had bragged about. The cash buyers who bypassed standard legal escrow. Suddenly, the bizarre nature of the transaction made perfect sense. Legitimate real estate developers do not hand over $1.2 million in liquid cash without running a basic title search. Legitimate developers do not use country club back channels to expedite a commercial acquisition. You are a shell company, I stated, stating the fact plainly through the intercom. You are a front for laundering money, and you just realized you bought a building that belongs to the United States government. The man with the broken nose slammed his fist against the door again. We do not care about the government, little girl, he growled. We care about our $1.2 million. You and your brother ran a very cute scam. You forged the papers, took our clean cash, and handed us a deed to a Department of Transportation demolition site. You thought you could hustle the people who hustle the city. I am not part of this, I said, gripping the edge of the console table to keep my hands from shaking. I had no knowledge of that sale. My brother forged my signature. He stole your money just like he stole my property. I have already contacted the federal authorities. Do not play stupid with us, the taller man hissed, his patience snapping. We know how this game works. Your brother is the idiot frontman, and you are the brains cleaning the cash through your high-end art business. Nobody blows $800,000 on internet coins unless they are trying to wash it. You hold the bag and you play the victim. It is a smart play, but it ends today. I stared at the monitor in absolute horror. They actually thought I was the mastermind. They thought Cameron was just my pawn, and that my legitimate conservation firm was a money laundering operation designed to clean their stolen cash. The sheer irony of the situation would have been hilarious if it were not completely deadly. Listen to me very carefully, I said, fighting to keep the panic out of my voice. I do not have your money. Cameron has your money. His wife just gave me the bank statements proving he transferred it to offshore accounts and car dealerships. I can slide the transaction logs under the door right now. We do not want transaction logs, Naomi. The man interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. We want our cash. We do not care if you have to sell every antique painting in your vault. We do not care if you have to liquidate your entire portfolio. You have exactly 24 hours to wire $1.2 million back to the origin account. If that money does not clear by tomorrow night, we are not going to knock on your door. We are going to find you on the street. We are going to visit your little art studio. We will burn your life down to the ashes. The taller man stepped back from the camera, adjusting his suit jacket. 24 hours, he repeated loudly. Tell your idiot brother the clock is ticking. I watched through the monitor as the two men turned and walked down the hallway, their heavy footsteps fading into the distance. The elevator doors opened and swallowed them whole, leaving the corridor empty. I released my grip on the intercom button, my legs suddenly feeling like lead. I slid down the wall until I hit the hardwood floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The gravity of the situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. My parents had not just sold my studio. They had not just stolen my money or ruined my family dynamics. By trying to fund their golden child's delusion, they had actively crossed a massive organized crime syndicate. They had taken dirty money from highly dangerous people and handed them a worthless piece of government property in return. I was completely trapped. If I went to the federal agents right now and handed over Naya's financial documents, I would be delivering Cameron to the FBI. But the moment the FBI froze those offshore accounts, the syndicate would lose their money forever, and they would hold me responsible. If I did not go to the FBI, my brother would continue his smear campaign, attempting to destroy my mental health and my pristine reputation, leaving me defenseless. I was cornered. I was caught in a deadly vice grip between a relentless federal investigation, a violent money laundering syndicate demanding their cash, and a toxic family actively trying to destroy my sanity to save their own skin. The air in my apartment felt thin and suffocating. I had 24 hours to figure a way out of a nightmare I did not even create. The panic lasted exactly 10 seconds. I sat on the hardwood floor of my apartment, pulling air into my lungs and staring at the closed door. I felt the cold sweat on my palms and the erratic beating of my heart. But then the analytical mind that allowed me to painstakingly restore priceless centuries-old artifacts, under immense pressure, took over. I was a professional who dealt with fragile, unstable situations every single day. I did not cower. I did not surrender. I wiped my hands on my trousers, pushed myself off the floor, and marched right back to the security console. The two men in cheap suits were still in the hallway. The taller one had just pressed the elevator call button. The digital display above the metal doors flashed, indicating the car was making its way up to my floor. I slammed my hand onto the intercom button. "Stop right there," I commanded. My voice did not shake. It cut through the hallway speaker like the crack of a whip. Both men froze. The man with the broken nose turned slowly, his thick neck straining against his collar. The taller man stepped away from the elevator doors and walked back toward my camera. A nasty, amused grin spread across his face. "Have you decided to be smart, Naomi?" the taller man asked, leaning into the microphone. "Are you going to wire the funds, or do we need to have a more personal conversation?" I stepped right up to the monitor. I looked directly into the camera lens, ensuring my eyes bored straight into his. I pointed my index finger right at the center of the glass. "I am going to give you a free lesson in federal law," I stated, my tone devoid of any fear. It was the tone of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "You are currently standing in front of an apartment leased by a key witness in an active federal investigation. The building you purchased from my idiot brother was seized by the United States Department of Transportation under the laws of eminent domain. It is part of a multi-billion-dollar interstate infrastructure project. Do you know what happens when organized crime syndicates accidentally purchase federal infrastructure sites and then threaten the previous owners?" The amusement vanished from the taller man's face. His jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing its arrogant swagger. "I am talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I replied smoothly, leaning closer to the intercom. "I am talking about the Homeland Security task forces that monitor properties tied to national infrastructure. Since yesterday evening, my name, my business, and this exact apartment address have been logged into a federal database. You think you are intimidating a helpless artist. What you are actually doing is standing in front of a high-definition security camera, threatening a federal witness on a recorded line, while federal agents are currently pulling my phone records and building a racketeering case." I watched the color completely drain from the face of the man with the broken nose. He looked up at the camera lens as if he had just realized it was a loaded weapon. He took a distinct step backward away from my door. "You are bluffing," the taller man sneered, but a bead of sweat had formed at his temple. "You do not have the feds involved yet. Do not gamble your freedom on my brother's stupidity." I warned, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. "My lawyer initiated the wire fraud complaint last night. You have a very small window before the FBI traces the origin of your $1.2 million. If you want your dirty money back, you are wasting your time banging on my door. I do not have a single cent of it, but I know exactly who does, and I know exactly where he is right now." The two men exchanged a rapid, tense look. The elevator chimed behind them, but neither of them moved to get in. The doors slid open and closed, leaving them standing in the hallway completely focused on my voice. "Who has the cash?" the taller man asked, his tone completely stripped of its former menace. He was strictly business now. He was a man trying to recover his syndicate's lost capital before the government froze every account associated with the transaction. "His name is Cameron," I said, clearly articulating every syllable. "He is my older brother. He is the one who forged the power of attorney. He is the one who took your cash and he is the one who foolishly thought he could play real estate mogul with a shadow company. He currently resides at 422 West Hawthorne Avenue in the gated community of Oakwood Estates. I watched the taller man pull a sleek black smartphone from his inner jacket pocket. He rapidly typed the address into his screen. And before you waste time interrogating him, I continued, I will tell you exactly where your money went. He transferred $800,000 into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange. He used another $250,000 to place a non-refundable deposit on a custom silver Porsche 911 GT3 at the downtown Exotic Auto Gallery. His wife just provided me with the complete transaction logs. If you want to recover your funds, you need to acquire his digital wallet keys. He has them on a physical hard drive at his house. The silence in the hallway was absolute. The two men stood there absorbing the sheer catastrophic magnitude of what I had just told them. They realized they were not dealing with a mastermind art thief. They realized they had been inadvertently scammed by a reckless, arrogant amateur who was burning their laundered money on sports cars and internet tokens. You better pray you are telling the truth, Naomi, the taller man said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I do not pray, I replied coldly. I just provide the facts. Cameron is at Hawthorne Avenue right now panicking because he knows the FBI is coming. If you want your money back, I suggest you get to him before the federal agents do. The man with the broken nose did not hesitate. He spun around and power walked toward the stairwell, completely ignoring the elevator. He did not want to be trapped in a steel box if federal agents were already sweeping the building. The taller man gave the camera one last hard look before turning on his heel and following his partner. I watched the security monitor as the heavy fire door slammed shut behind them. They were gone. They were not my problem anymore. I had successfully redirected a violent organized crime syndicate right onto the doorstep of the Golden Child. Cameron wanted to play the role of a brilliant cutthroat businessman. He wanted to steal my assets and fund his lavish lifestyle while laughing in my face. Now he was about to get a masterclass in aggressive debt collection from men who did not care about his startup pitch deck or his designer turtlenecks. I stepped away from the console and walked back into my kitchen. I picked up my cold coffee and poured it down the sink. I needed a fresh cup. The board was perfectly set. The FBI was building the fraud case. The criminal syndicate was hunting down the stolen funds, and my family was about to face the devastating consequences of their own boundless greed. 2 days passed in a state of eerie, absolute calm inside my apartment. I stood over my work table, carefully repairing a delicate tear in a Renaissance canvas, while the outside world completely unraveled for my biological family. I did not reach out to them. I did not check my block list for their frantic voicemails. The board was perfectly set, and all I had to do was wait for the dominoes to fall. The silence was finally broken when my secure phone chimed with an encrypted message. It was Nia. She had officially moved into a luxury high-rise downtown, severing all physical ties with Cameron, and was now monitoring the fallout from a very safe distance. Her voice came through the speaker, crisp and laced with dark, genuine amusement. You really sent the wolves directly to his front door, Naomi, she said. Cameron is currently hiding inside his house with all the blinds drawn and the security system fully armed. He has a nasty purple bruise forming on his left cheekbone. Apparently the syndicate does not appreciate it when you tell them their laundered money is locked inside a crashing digital currency exchange. I wiped my hands on a clean cloth and leaned against my heavy wooden workbench. Did he give them the digital wallet keys? I asked, keeping my tone entirely analytical. He tried, Nia replied, her voice dropping into a register of absolute disgust. But the cryptocurrency he invested in took a massive plunge yesterday morning. That $800,000 is currently worth less than $200,000. The exotic car dealership flatly refused to refund his non-refundable deposit on the Porsche. He is short on the cash by a massive margin, and the men in the cheap suits gave him exactly 48 hours to make them whole. To make matters infinitely worse, federal agents showed up at your parents' colonial estate early this morning. They handed your father and your mother official federal subpoenas. The government is formally requesting all financial records, communication logs, and property deeds related to the studio sale. The net is officially closing. Any rational human being would have immediately contacted a defense attorney and negotiated a plea deal. A normal family would have realized the game was completely over and surrendered to the authorities to avoid violent retaliation from a ruthless money laundering syndicate. But Richard and Barbara were not normal people. They were raging narcissists whose entire existence relied on maintaining an impenetrable illusion of absolute superiority. Admitting defeat meant admitting they were common criminals who had been outsmarted by the daughter they relentlessly mocked. They chose delusion instead of reality. Nia sent me a digital file a few hours later. I opened the encrypted document on my tablet and stared at the screen in pure, unadulterated disbelief. It was an incredibly lavish, gold-embossed digital invitation. It read, "The Future of Innovation, an exclusive angel investor gala hosted by Cameron." The venue was the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive five-star hotel. The event was scheduled for tomorrow evening. My parents were not running, they were doubling down. They had decided to play one final catastrophic gamble to save their golden child from the mob and the federal government. I called David, my lawyer, and forwarded him the digital invitation. "Do you see what they are doing?" I asked, pacing across my hardwood floor, my mind racing as I pieced their horrific strategy together. They are cornered by organized crime and targeted by the FBI, so they are throwing a massive luxury party. They are trying to trap angel investors. David let out a low whistle of utter disbelief on the other end of the line. "They are orchestrating a classic Ponzi maneuver," he stated, his legal mind dissecting the threat. "Your father likely liquidated the very last of his legitimate retirement savings to rent that five-star ballroom and hire premium catering. They are going to invite every wealthy contact from their country club, every naive angel investor in the tech scene, and every local politician they can find. They plan to put Cameron on a stage to pitch his non-existent artificial intelligence software," I continued. "They will use the sheer opulence of the gala to project an image of massive corporate success. They want to pressure those wealthy attendees into signing early seed round investment checks right there at the dinner tables. They need to raise at least $2 million in liquid cash overnight. They need it to pay off the syndicate assassins before they break Cameron's legs, and they need the rest to hire high-powered white-collar defense attorneys to fight the impending FBI indictments." It was an act of pure, desperate madness. They honestly believed they could charm and scam their way out of a federal prosecution. They thought a room full of expensive champagne, towering ice sculptures, and string quartets would blind intelligent investors to the fact that there was no actual software product. Richard and Barbara were fully willing to defraud their own lifelong friends and country club associates just to maintain the illusion that their son was a genius. They were building a fragile house of cards on top of a burning bridge. The sheer arrogance of it made my blood run cold. They were going to stand in a five-star hotel wearing expensive designer clothes and smile at people while actively trying to rob them blind. They thought they could simply erase my $5 million government buyout by stealing more money from different people. They thought they were completely untouchable. They believed the rules of society and the laws of the federal government simply did not apply to them. I locked the screen of my tablet and walked slowly over to my closet. They wanted to throw a spectacular gala to celebrate their fake empire. They wanted an audience to validate their grand delusion. I decided it was only fair that they receive an audience who truly understood the exact nature of their business. I reached for a garment bag hanging in the back of my wardrobe. It was time to get dressed for a party. I was standing in front of my open closet looking at a sleek crimson evening gown when the intercom buzzed. It was the lobby concierge announcing a courier delivery requiring my direct signature. I secured the dress on its velvet hanger and walked to the front door. The courier handed me a thick, heavy envelope sealed with an obnoxious gold wax stamp. I did not need to open it to know exactly where it came from. The scent of my mother's signature expensive perfume clung to the thick cardstock like a toxic warning label. I carried the envelope to my kitchen island and sliced it open with a letter opener. Inside was a VIP all-access pass to Cameron's fraudulent angel investor gala. It was printed on premium matte paper with glossy embossed lettering. It was a masterpiece of absolute delusion. But the physical invitation was merely a prop. The real weapon arrived a moment later. My laptop chimed with an incoming priority email. The sender was Barbara. I opened the message and read the most despicable piece of correspondence my mother had ever produced. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for a terrified family seeking mercy. It was an outright act of unhinged extortion. Naomi, the email began devoid of any maternal warmth. You will attend the gala tomorrow evening. You will wear something appropriate, and you will sit at the VIP table next to your brother. At 8 o'clock, the press and our primary investors will be seated for the keynote address. You will take the microphone, and you will publicly clarify that the sale of your studio was a mutual family decision. You will state on camera that the federal wire fraud complaint was a simple clerical misunderstanding filed in error. You will smile, and you will clear your brother's name. I stared at the screen, my eyes narrowing as I read the next paragraph. If you decide to be selfish and refuse this simple request, your father and I have taken precautions. We have secured a private psychiatric specialist who is fully prepared to sign a sworn medical affidavit. This document declares that you are suffering from severe paranoid schizophrenia and that you have entirely lost touch with reality. If you do not clear Cameron's name on that stage tomorrow, we will file an emergency petition in state court for a full legal conservatorship. We will present your recent behavior and the fabricated medical records to a judge. We will strip you of your civil rights. We will take total legal control of your health care, your business, and your finances, including the $5 million government payout you just received. Do not test us, Naomi. Be a good daughter, or we will take your entire life away. I read the email a second time, letting the sheer psychotic magnitude of the threat sink into my bones. My own mother was attempting to legally erase my autonomy. She was plotting to institutionalize me with fake medical records just to protect her golden child from federal prison. They wanted to seize control of my hard-earned wealth to pay off the money laundering syndicate that was currently hunting them. They thought they could strip me of my fundamental human rights because I refused to be their sacrificial lamb. I did not panic. I did not cry. My heart rate remained completely steady. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer immediately. David answered on the first ring. I forwarded you an email from my mother, I said, my voice ice cold. Read it right now. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. A heavy silence stretched for several seconds as David processed the contents of the email. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with absolute legal fury. This is textbook extortion, Naomi, David stated firmly. It is also conspiracy to commit medical fraud and an overt attempt to intimidate a federal witness. Your parents have completely lost their minds. They are handing us the exact evidence we need to bury them. A judge will take one look at this threat and deny any conservatorship petition instantly, especially when we present your pristine financial records and legitimate business contracts. I know they cannot actually win a conservatorship case, I replied, leaning against the cool marble of my kitchen counter. But I also know that defending against one is a drawn-out public nightmare. They want to tie me up in probate court to freeze my government payout while Cameron escapes with the investors' money. They are desperate, David agreed. They are backed into a corner by the syndicate and the FBI. They are acting like trapped animals. I am forwarding this email directly to the federal prosecutor handling the wire fraud case right now. This violates every condition of their subpoenas. Tell the federal agents to hold their fire until tomorrow night. I instructed, my eyes drifting back to the crimson evening gown hanging in my closet. Tell them to send their agents to the grand ballroom of the hotel at exactly 8 o'clock. What are you planning, Naomi? David asked, a hint of caution in his tone. My mother wants me to attend her gala, I said, a sharp smile touching the corners of my mouth. She wants me to take the microphone and speak to her investors and the press. She went through all the trouble of sending me a VIP pass. It would be incredibly rude of me to decline such a generous invitation. I am going to give them exactly the show they asked for. I ended the call and dialed a second number. Nia answered immediately, her background noise indicating she was in her new luxury high-rise. "Did you get an invitation to the circus?" I asked her. Nia let out a dark, rich laugh. "A gold-embossed VIP pass was slipped under my door an hour ago," she replied. "Cameron sent a pathetic text begging me to stand by his side for the press photos. He thinks if I stand there looking like the supportive corporate executive wife, it will legitimize his grand illusion." "Are you going?" I asked, knowing the answer before she even spoke. "I bought a brand new designer pantsuit specifically for the occasion," Nia stated, her voice ringing with absolute lethal confidence. "I would not miss the collapse of his fake empire for anything in the world. We have front row seats to the best destruction in the city." "I will see you at the hotel, Nia," I said. I ended the call and walked back to my bedroom. I reached out and ran my fingers over the smooth crimson fabric of the evening gown. My parents thought they could terrorize me into submission. They thought the threat of a fake medical diagnosis would break my spirit and force me back into the role of the obedient, silent failure. They had grossly underestimated the woman they had abused for 33 years. I was not walking into that ballroom as a victim. I was walking in as the executioner. I stood in my bedroom staring at the crimson evening gown hanging from the wardrobe door. I did not let my mother's psychotic extortion attempt rattle my focus or elevate my heart rate. I picked up my phone and dialed Nia's number again, needing to finalize our tactical strategy. She answered on the second ring, the ambient noise of a busy downtown avenue echoing in the background. I told her about the fabricated medical records my parents planned to use against me to seize control of my government payout. Nia let out a sharp, dark laugh of absolute disbelief. "They are completely unhinged, Naomi," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the static. "But their timing is actually perfect. I just walked out of the county courthouse. I officially filed the divorce petition 30 minutes ago. The ink is barely dry. I also secured an emergency financial injunction from the judge. Every single legitimate joint account we shared is now completely frozen. Cameron cannot touch our mortgage equity, he cannot access my corporate salary, and he cannot liquidate our shared retirement portfolios to pay off his syndicate debts. He is entirely isolated with his stolen government money and whatever is left of his crypto wallet." "That is brilliant," I replied, feeling a genuine surge of admiration for my soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law. "He is going to walk onto that stage tonight, completely oblivious to the fact that he is financially ruined on all fronts." Nia hummed in agreement. I also just got off a highly classified conference call with Special Agent Reynolds from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is the lead investigator handling the eminent domain wire fraud case. The Bureau has been monitoring the syndicate's movements all afternoon. Reynolds confirmed that the men in the cheap suits are actively circling the hotel tonight, waiting for Cameron to deliver their laundered cash. I leaned against my bedroom wall, processing the layout of the evening. "Are the federal agents moving in during the gala?" I asked. "Reynolds is positioning an entire tactical unit in the hotel lobby and the service elevators," Nia confirmed. "They have the wire transfer logs I provided and the extortion emails you forwarded through your lawyer. They have enough probable cause to arrest your father and your brother 10 times over." "Beans. Reynolds wants us to proceed exactly as your mother requested. We walk in, we take our seats, and we let Cameron dig his own grave on a live microphone. The moment he publicly solicits investment funds using the stolen government property as collateral, they will breach the room." I ended the call with Nia and looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. For 33 years, I had worn neutral colors to family events, trying to blend into the background. I had deliberately made myself invisible to avoid my mother's relentless criticism and my father's dismissive sneers. I had dimmed my own light so Cameron's mediocre existence could shine brighter. That era of submission was officially over. I unzipped the garment bag and pulled out the crimson evening gown. The fabric was heavy, luxurious silk that draped perfectly across my silhouette. It was not a dress meant for an obedient, terrified daughter. It was armor crafted for an executioner. I applied my makeup with the meticulous precision of an art conservator restoring a priceless masterpiece. I painted my lips a deep shade of burgundy and pulled my dark hair back into a sleek, flawless twist. I fastened a pair of diamond stud earrings I had purchased after securing my first National Museum contract. I looked absolutely nothing like the fragile, unstable woman my mother intended to portray to her wealthy investors. I looked like a woman who commanded seven-figure conservation projects and possessed absolute control over her own destiny. I slipped my feet into a pair of sharp stiletto heels and grabbed my evening clutch. Inside the small velvet bag, I carried nothing but my phone, my identification, and a small digital audio recorder. I walked out of my apartment and took the elevator down to the lobby, where a black town car was already waiting to take me to the Tiger's Den. The five-star hotel was a beacon of excessive luxury located in the heart of the financial district. I stepped out of the town car and handed the keys to the valet. The grand entrance was flanked by towering marble pillars and elaborate floral arrangements that easily cost more than my entire college education. My parents had spared absolutely no expense to create this grand illusion. They had liquidated whatever clean money they had left to build a spectacular stage for their golden child. I walked through the revolving glass doors and into the opulent lobby. The air hummed with the sound of a live string quartet playing in the distance. I spotted Nia immediately. She was standing near the grand staircase wearing a flawlessly tailored emerald green pantsuit that radiated absolute corporate authority. She looked powerful, untouchable, and entirely ready to watch her soon-to-be ex-husband burn to the ground. "You look magnificent," Naomi, Nia said, greeting me with a firm nod of approval. "The press is already inside. The angel investors are drinking top-shelf champagne and eating beluga caviar. Cameron is backstage sweating through his custom suit trying to memorize a pitch deck he did not even write." "Are Richard and Barbara working the room?" I asked, keeping my voice low as a group of wealthy socialites walked past us. Nia offered a cold, sharp smile. "They are shaking hands and kissing babies. They are telling everyone who will listen that you are currently undergoing a tragic mental health crisis and that they heroically sold a family asset to fund Cameron's genius vision. They are setting the stage for your public humiliation. Let them spin their fairy tales," I replied, adjusting my evening clutch. "The truth is going to be incredibly loud tonight." We walked side by side up the grand staircase and approached the heavy mahogany doors of the main ballroom. Two private security guards in dark suits stood on either side, holding digital guest lists. Nia and I did not even break our stride. We flashed our gold-embossed VIP passes, and the guards immediately pulled the massive doors open for us. The ballroom was a masterpiece of financial deception. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of round tables draped in black silk. Waiters in white gloves circulated with silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. At the very front of the room stood a massive, brightly lit stage equipped with a professional audio setup and two giant presentation screens displaying a sleek, meaningless corporate logo. And there, standing dead center on the stage under a brilliant white spotlight, was Cameron. He was holding a wireless microphone, pacing back and forth with the practiced arrogance of a Silicon Valley visionary. He was mid-sentence boasting to a room full of millionaires about his unparalleled genius and the revolutionary artificial intelligence software that did not actually exist. "We stand on the precipice of a new digital era." Cameron projected his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "A future built on the foundation of brilliant innovation and unwavering family support. We are here to disrupt the industry and rewrite the rules of technology." I took a deep breath. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind me and Nia with a resounding definitive thud. The heavy mahogany doors sealing shut behind us echoed like a judge gavel dropping in a silent courtroom. Nia and I stood at the apex of the grand ballroom, taking in the sheer spectacle of my family's desperate delusion. The room was dripping in excessive wealth. Waiters circulated with silver platters of champagne while a string quartet played softly. And there was Cameron, bathed in a white spotlight, pacing the stage with a wireless microphone. He waved his hands frantically using tech buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. He talked about disruptive algorithms, while the wealthy angel investors in the audience nodded along, completely unaware they were being conned by a man who had just gambled away a fortune on digital tokens. I kept my head held high, my crimson silk gown brushing against the thick carpet as Nia and I walked forward. We glided through the perimeter of the room, projecting an aura of total, absolute control. Nia looked like a lethal corporate shark in her emerald suit, her eyes scanning the crowd and instantly identifying the key financial players. My parents were holding court near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a circle of affluent older investors and a few local journalists. Barbara wore a dazzling diamond necklace that I knew for a fact was purchased on a maxed-out credit card. She held a champagne flute, delicately pressing a manicured hand to her chest, playing the role of the long-suffering but fiercely proud matriarch. I stepped closer, signaling Nia to hang back slightly so we could listen to the poison spilling from my mother's mouth. "It has just been such a difficult, heartbreaking season for our family," Barbara said, her voice carrying a theatrical note of profound sorrow. "We are so incredibly proud of Cameron and his visionary enterprise, but managing his success while dealing with his sister's tragic decline has been exhausting. You see, Naomi has always struggled with severe jealousy. She dropped out of her business courses to pursue a frivolous little painting hobby, and when Cameron secured his initial capital funding, she completely snapped." An older investor in a tailored tuxedo nodded sympathetically. "It is a tragedy when a child throws their potential away," he murmured. "It truly is." Richard chimed in, placing a comforting arm around Barbara's waist, projecting the image of a stoic, protective father carrying a heavy burden. Naomi became incredibly hostile and erratic when we decided to liquidate an underperforming family asset to fund Cameron's seed round. She packed her bags and abandoned the family, acting like a spoiled, entitled teenager. She even started spreading paranoid delusions, claiming we somehow stole from her. We are currently working with top private psychiatric specialists to get her placed in a secure residential facility so she can finally get the serious medical help she desperately needs. We just want our daughter back. The sheer repulsive audacity of their lies made my blood run entirely cold. They were systematically dismantling my entire reputation in front of high-net-worth individuals, ensuring that if I ever tried to speak the truth, I would immediately be dismissed as a bitter, insane woman. They were actively setting the psychological stage for their fake conservatorship petition. I stepped fully into the light, my crimson gown catching the glare of the crystal chandeliers. I walked directly toward their little circle of deception. Richard spotted me first. His eyes widened in absolute shock as he took in my appearance. He expected a frantic, disheveled woman showing up to beg for mercy. He did not expect a poised, immaculate executioner flanked by an elite chief financial officer. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. "Excuse me for just a moment, gentlemen," Richard said quickly to the investors, his voice tightening with suppressed panic. "My daughter has actually just arrived. I need to greet her." He abandoned his audience and marched directly toward me, closing the distance before I could reach the center of the room. He grabbed my upper arm with a painful vice-like grip and physically dragged me behind a massive floral arrangement near the catering entrance, effectively shielding us from the main crowd. Naya followed closely behind, her arms crossed, her dark eyes locked onto my father with lethal intent. "What the hell do you think you are doing wearing that dress?" Richard hissed, his voice dropping to a vicious guttural growl. "You are supposed to look apologetic and contrite. You are supposed to look like a sick woman seeking redemption, not a runway model." "I am wearing what I felt was appropriate for a slaughter, Richard," I replied smoothly, effortlessly, prying his fingers off my arm and smoothing the silk of my sleeve. "I received Barbara's lovely email. I am here to fulfill my end of the arrangement. You wanted a public statement, so I brought myself and Cameron's wife to deliver it." Richard glared at Nia, his nostrils flaring. Nia does not belong here, he snapped. This is a private family matter. I am the chief financial officer of the man standing on that stage, Richard Nia stated, her voice ringing with icy authority. I belong exactly where the money is. Richard turned his furious gaze back to me, completely ignoring Nia's presence. Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little brat, he growled, jabbing a finger directly at my face. You are going to walk up those stairs right now. You are going to take the microphone from your brother. You are going to look out at those reporters and you are going to tell them you had a complete nervous breakdown. You will apologize to Cameron for your psychotic behavior, and you will explicitly state that the property sale was completely lawful and authorized by you. And if I refuse, I asked, tilting my head slightly. If you refuse, I will signal the private doctors I have waiting in the executive lounge upstairs. Richard threatened, his eyes bulging with manic desperation. I will have you restrained, heavily medicated, and dragged out the back door in an ambulance. We have the forged medical records ready to file with a judge at dawn. You will wake up in a locked ward without a phone, without your business, and without a single dollar of your government payout. I will rip your entire life apart, Naomi. Now get on that stage and clear your brother's name before I destroy you. I looked at my father, absorbing the absolute depth of his depravity. He was truly willing to lock his own sane daughter in a psychiatric ward just to cover up his federal crimes. I did not show an ounce of fear. You are right, father, I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any hesitation. It is time to clear the air. It is time for someone to take that microphone and tell these wealthy investors exactly what kind of business Cameron is running. I turned to Nia, offering her a sharp, knowing smile. Nia adjusted the lapels of her emerald suit. Her eyes locked onto the illuminated stage, where her fraudulent husband was still babbling about the future of technology. I believe the chief financial officer should have the floor first, I said. Nia did not even glance at my father. She simply stepped around him as if he were an inconsequential piece of furniture. Her emerald green pantsuit commanded the room as she walked with a steady, measured pace straight down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. I followed a few paces behind her, my crimson gown sweeping the floor, my head held high. Richard reached out to grab me again, but he stopped. The room was too crowded now, and causing a physical altercation in front of the city elite would shatter his carefully crafted illusion faster than my words ever could. He was trapped in his own prison of public perception. On the stage, Cameron was currently wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He was rambling about deep learning and neural networks, tossing out technical jargon he clearly had memorized phonetically from a tech blog. He looked down and saw his wife ascending the carpeted stairs. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He actually believed she was coming up to save him. He thought Nia was going to stand by his side, play the role of the devoted corporate spouse, and validate his grand charade. The wealthy angel investors and members of the local press began to applaud. They thought this was a choreographed moment. The brilliant tech visionary joined on stage by his powerful, beautiful chief financial officer wife. It was the perfect Silicon Valley fairy tale. Barbara, who was standing near the front row, clapped the loudest, beaming with toxic pride. She truly thought her extortion email had worked. She thought she had won. Nia reached the center of the stage. Cameron smiled and held out his hand, expecting her to take it. Nia ignored his hand entirely. She stepped right past him and walked directly to the digital presentation podium. Before Cameron could even register what was happening, Nia pulled a small silver encrypted flash drive from her pocket and slid it into the master console. She tapped the touchscreen interface twice, overriding the hotel audiovisual system. The massive glowing screens behind Cameron flickered. His sleek, meaningless corporate logo vanished instantly. In its place, a series of highly detailed, highlighted bank statements and wire transfer logs illuminated the ballroom in stark white light. The numbers were massive, and they were entirely colored in red, indicating catastrophic losses. Nia reached over and smoothly slipped the wireless microphone right out of Cameron's hand. He was too stunned to resist. He stood there blinking under the bright stage lights, staring at the financial documents projected behind him like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding truck. Good evening, investors, members of the press, and distinguished guests. Nia said, her voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system with absolute crystal-clear authority. Thank you all for attending this incredibly lavish gathering. My name is Nia. I am a certified public accountant, a corporate finance executive, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the soon-to-be ex-wife of the man standing next to me. A collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. The polite applause died instantly, replaced by a sharp, tense silence. Barbara stopped clapping her hands, freezing in midair. I am also speaking to you tonight in my capacity as the former chief financial officer of this so-called technology enterprise. Nia continued pacing slowly across the stage, owning every single inch of the room. I say former because I officially resigned my position and locked all corporate accounting software the moment I discovered the horrific truth about this operation. You have spent the last 30 minutes listening to the chief executive officer talk about revolutionary algorithms and disruptive software. I am here to provide you with the actual financial reality. Nia turned and pointed a sharp manicured finger at the massive screens behind her. I want every angel investor in this room to look very closely at those statements, Nia instructed, her voice carrying the lethal weight of undeniable truth. The artificial intelligence model being pitched to you tonight does not exist. It is complete, absolute vaporware. There are no software engineers on payroll. There is no proprietary code. There is no product. You are sitting in a ballroom funded by a desperate criminal attempting to solicit your hard-earned capital to pay off his own catastrophic debts. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Several prominent investors in the front row pulled out their reading glasses, leaning forward to scrutinize the projected documents. They were looking at the massive offshore cryptocurrency transfers. Let us talk about the seed funding, Nia announced, projecting her voice over the rising whispers. You were told that this company secured a $1.2 million initial investment. That much is true. The money hit the business account on Tuesday, but it was not secured through venture capital or a legitimate real estate transaction. That $1.2 million was acquired through federal wire fraud and grand larceny. Cameron finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He lunged forward, reaching for the microphone. Nia, step away from the podium, he hissed, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. Turn those screens off right now. You are having a breakdown. Nia did not retreat. She stood her ground and easily sidestepped his grasping hands. She held the microphone firmly, maintaining perfect eye contact with the audience. The chief executive officer and his father forged a legal power of attorney to steal commercial property belonging to his own sister Nia, declared, refusing to be silenced. And to make matters worse, they fraudulently sold that property to a front company without realizing the building was already acquired by the United States Department of Transportation under eminent domain. The seed money paying for your champagne tonight was literally stolen from a violent money laundering syndicate by selling land owned by the federal government. Total chaos erupted in the ballroom. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor as several wealthy investors immediately stood up, reaching for their phones to call their legal teams. The journalists in the back of the room started snapping photos frantically, their camera flashes illuminating the panic spreading across the room. And if you are wondering where that stolen government money went, Nia continued, raising her voice to cut through the escalating panic. Look at line 4 on the screen behind me. Within 10 minutes of receiving those illicit funds, your brilliant visionary CEO transferred $800,000 into an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange. He bought a volatile digital coin that crashed yesterday morning, wiping out the entire investment. He also wired $250,000 to a luxury exotic car dealership as a non-refundable deposit for a custom silver Porsche. People were actively running toward the exit doors now. Nobody wanted to be in a room associated with federal wire fraud and stolen government property. They were fleeing the sinking ship as fast as their expensive shoes could carry them. This company is a scam, Nia pronounced, delivering the final fatal blow. It is a desperate illusion built by a mediocre man trying to outrun the federal agents and the organized crime syndicate currently hunting him down. Keep your checkbooks closed, keep your wallets in your pockets, and walk out of those doors while you still can. Because this enterprise is officially dead. Naya lowered the microphone. She turned and looked at Cameron, who was hyperventilating on the stage, his chest heaving as he watched the wealthy elite stampede out of his fraudulent gala. His grand illusion was completely shattered, reduced to dust in less than 3 minutes. Nia dropped the microphone onto the wooden stage floor. It hit the boards with a loud, high-pitched feedback screech that perfectly punctuated the end of his entire career. She turned her back on him and walked gracefully down the stage steps, her emerald suit untouched by the wreckage she left behind. The grand ballroom devolved into absolute pandemonium. Wealthy angel investors shoved past each other in a frantic stampede toward the mahogany exit doors. Crystal champagne flutes shattered against the polished marble floors as guests abandoned their tables. The air was thick with the sound of angry shouts and the frantic clicking of camera shutters from the local press. Nobody wanted to be caught in a room tied to federal wire fraud and stolen government property. On the stage, Cameron was completely unraveling. He scrambled toward the master console, tripping over the microphone cord in his desperation. His custom-tailored suit was drenched in a cold, terrified sweat. He clawed frantically at the thick black cables connecting Nia's flash drive to the audiovisual system. He yanked a bundle of wires from the wall socket, causing the massive projection screens to glitch violently before finally going black. But his efforts were entirely pointless. The damning financial statements had already been burned into the retinas of every single journalist and investor in the room. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the box. Down on the main floor, the illusion of the perfect wealthy family was shattering in spectacular fashion. Richard frantically grabbed the arm of a prominent venture capitalist, trying to pull him back toward the VIP table. The investor ripped his arm away with a look of profound disgust, muttering a sharp threat about legal action before sprinting for the exit. Richard was left standing alone amidst overturned chairs and spilled beluga caviar, his face a mask of absolute horror. Then the screaming began. Barbara completely lost her grip on reality. The elegant, composed matriarch, who had spent decades meticulously crafting her high society image, collapsed right in the middle of the ballroom. She dropped to her knees, ruining her expensive designer gown in a puddle of spilled champagne. She slammed her fists against the carpet, wailing with a high-pitched, hysterical ferocity that echoed over the fleeing crowd. It was not a cry of genuine remorse. It was the terrifying screech of a narcissist, realizing she had permanently lost her audience and her power. Her frantic eyes darted around the chaotic room until they locked onto me. I was standing perfectly still near the center aisle, my crimson silk gown untouched by the frantic stampede. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I watched her world burn with absolute clinical detachment. Barbara scrambled to her feet and lunged toward me, her face contorted with a vicious feral rage. She pointed a trembling finger right at my chest. "You did this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure venom. "You planned this entire spectacle to ruin us. You are a demon, Naomi. You are an evil, vindictive monster slaughtering your own family. We gave you everything, and you destroyed your brother out of pure spite." Richard rushed to her side, nodding along with her unhinged accusations. He glared at me with an intensity that would have terrified me a decade ago. Now it just looked pathetic. "You are sick," Richard growled, his voice shaking. "We tried to cover for your mental instability. We tried to protect you, and this is how you repay us. You are going to burn in hell for tearing this family apart." I did not back away. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. The remaining journalists in the room immediately pointed their cameras in our direction, eager to capture the final catastrophic confrontation. I held my head high, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. "I did not destroy this family, Barbara." I stated, my voice cutting through the noise of the ballroom like a sharpened blade. I simply stopped lying to protect it. I looked down at my mother, who was still trembling with misdirected rage. Then I shifted my gaze to Richard, who was breathing heavily, his fists clenched at his sides. Finally, I looked past them to the stage where Cameron was sitting on the wooden floor holding his head in his hands. I did not force you to forge my signature on a legal power of attorney. I continued enunciating every single word so the press could hear it perfectly. I did not force Richard to bypass standard escrow protocols to execute a fraudulent real estate transaction. And I certainly did not force Cameron to steal $1.2 million from a dangerous criminal syndicate and gamble it away on internet tokens. My parents stared at me, their mouths opening and closing, without producing any sound. They had no counter-argument. The undeniable truth was an absolute defense against their manipulation. "You did all of that entirely on your own," I said, my tone dropping to a lethal frozen calm. "You committed federal crimes because you truly believed you were above the law. You risked my reputation and my freedom because you thought I was too weak to fight back. You built a fragile empire out of greed, arrogance, and profound stupidity. Do not dare stand there and call me a monster because your own house of cards finally collapsed. You destroyed yourselves." Barbara let out another agonizing wail, dropping her face into her hands. She finally realized the harsh, unyielding reality of her situation. There were no more lies to spin. There were no more wealthy friends to impress. The country club associates who had attended the gala were already gone, taking her social standing with them. She was entirely exposed as a fraud and a criminal accomplice. Richard stood paralyzed, staring at the empty tables and the shattered glass littering the ballroom floor. The sheer magnitude of their legal and financial ruin was finally crashing down upon him. He had liquidated his last remaining clean assets to fund this spectacular failure. He had nothing left to negotiate with and nowhere left to run. I turned my back on them. I had delivered the truth, and my part in this twisted family performance was officially over. I walked gracefully toward the grand exit doors, my crimson gown trailing behind me, leaving my parents to stand alone in the wreckage of their own catastrophic greed. I had taken exactly 5 steps away from my parents when the heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom did not just open. They were violently thrust apart. The heavy wood slammed against the interior walls with a deafening crash that echoed over the remaining chaos in the room. The fleeing investors and terrified hotel staff froze in their tracks. The frantic energy of the gala was instantly replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. A wave of dark tactical uniforms flooded the entrance. Over a dozen armed federal agents and state police officers swarmed into the opulent space, moving with absolute lethal precision. They bypassed the overturned tables, the shattered crystal champagne flutes, and the discarded silk napkins. They formed a tight, impenetrable perimeter, securing every possible exit strategy my family might have entertained. At the front of the formation walked Special Agent Reynolds. He was a tall, imposing man wearing a dark tailored suit and a gold shield clipped to his belt. He did not look impressed by the crystal chandeliers or the towering ice sculptures. He looked like an apex predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Nobody move," Reynolds commanded, his voice projecting across the ballroom with the authority of a thunderclap. "Federal agents. This area is completely secured." Barbara let out a high-pitched, terrified gasp. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her ruined designer gown tangling around her legs until she hit the base of a catering table. Richard stood completely paralyzed. His hands fell limply to his sides. The arrogant silverback gorilla posture he had maintained for 62 years vanished instantly. He looked like a hollow, fragile shell of a man. Agent Reynolds marched straight past me without a single glance. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew I was not the target. He stopped directly in front of my father. 2 state police officers flanked him immediately, cutting off any potential retreat. Richard Anderson Reynolds stated, pulling a folded document from his inner jacket pocket, "I have a federal warrant for your arrest." Richard opened his mouth, but only a pathetic squeaking sound came out. He raised his trembling hands in a gesture of surrender. There has to be a mistake, he stammered, his voice cracking with unfiltered panic. I am a respected businessman. I am a member of the country club. My daughter is mentally unwell. She made a false report. This is all a massive misunderstanding about a private family property dispute. Agent Reynolds did not even blink. There is no misunderstanding, Richard. We have secured the wire transfer logs, the forged power of attorney, and the extortion emails you sent regarding fabricated medical records. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery of federal documents, and the illicit sale of property belonging to the United States Department of Transportation. A state police officer stepped forward. He grabbed my father's wrists, roughly pulling them behind his back. The cold, sharp click of metal handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly through the silent ballroom. It was the sound of absolute finality, the sound of a man losing his entire identity, his freedom, and his carefully constructed high society illusion in a single breathtaking second. Barbara screamed. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a raw, animalistic shriek of pure denial. She watched her husband being hauled away by armed officers, and she realized that the luxurious lifestyle she had prioritized over her own daughter was officially dead. Agent Reynolds did not pause to offer her any sympathy. He turned his attention to the brilliantly lit stage where the fake artificial intelligence logo had been replaced by the damning financial records. Cameron was still sitting on the wooden floorboards. The golden child was weeping openly. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his expensive grooming. He was hyperventilating, gasping for air, as Reynolds ascended the carpeted stairs. Cameron Anderson. Reynolds announced, his voice echoing through the stage microphones that had been left active. You are under arrest for grand larceny, money laundering, and defrauding the federal government. I did not know. Cameron sobbed, holding his hands up to shield his face from the bright stage lights. I did not know the building belonged to the state. My dad told me the paperwork was clean. I just wanted to build a software company. I just needed the seed money to hire developers. I am a victim here. I was set up by my sister. She is trying to ruin my life because she is jealous of my potential. Save it for the federal judge, Reynolds replied, completely unbothered by the pathetic display. We have the transaction records showing your immediate transfers to offshore cryptocurrency exchanges and exotic auto dealerships. You laundered stolen government funds to buy a sports car. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Two federal agents hauled Cameron to his feet. He offered no resistance. His legs gave out, and the agents practically had to drag him toward the stairs. Another sharp metallic click rang out. The golden boy was securely handcuffed, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. The custom-tailored suit he had bought to play the role of a tech billionaire was now the outfit he would wear to his first federal booking. I stood near the center aisle, my breathing completely steady. I watched the agents escort my father and my brother across the ballroom floor. They walked right past me. Richard kept his head down, staring at the ruined carpet, his face burning with absolute shame. Cameron was openly sobbing, begging the officers to call his lawyer, begging them to give him one more chance to fix the code. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I did not hurl any insults. I did not feel the need to kick them while they were down, because they had already buried themselves under the weight of their own monumental greed. I had spent 33 years watching them destroy my self-worth and diminish my accomplishments. In less than 24 hours, I had watched the federal government strip them of their arrogance and their freedom. I looked across the room and found Naya standing near the exit. The emerald green suit remained completely immaculate. She gave me a single firm nod of mutual respect. We had executed the strategy flawlessly. The parasite and his enablers had been excised from our lives permanently. I turned my back to the stage and the sobbing remnants of my biological family. I walked toward the open mahogany doors, holding my head high, my crimson silk gown flowing smoothly behind me. I stepped out into the hotel lobby and headed straight for the revolving glass doors. I stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. The street was lined with federal vehicles, their red and blue emergency lights painting the city in vibrant, flashing colors. I did not look back. I simply walked away, leaving the wreckage entirely behind me. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly fine and remarkably fast when the United States government is the primary victim. There were no prolonged dramatic trials or high society legal maneuvers available to save my family. The evidence against them was absolute and insurmountable. My lawyer David and the federal prosecutors had assembled a titanium vault of documentation that left no room for negotiation. The forged power of attorney, the wire transfer logs tracing the stolen cash, the extortion emails attempting to weaponize fake medical records, and the audio-visual recording of Cameron attempting to solicit further fraudulent investments on a hot microphone provided an inescapable reality. Richard faced the federal judge mere months after the disastrous gala. The 62-year-old man who had spent his entire adult life equating human worth to corporate titles stood at the defense table looking thoroughly defeated. He had desperately tried to call in favors from his affluent country club associates, but his calls went completely unanswered. The wealthy elite severed all ties the moment the FBI raided his colonial estate, refusing to associate their own pristine reputations with a documented federal criminal. His highly expensive defense attorney attempted to argue that Richard was simply a misguided protective father trying to help his son navigate a complex business landscape. The federal judge did not entertain the arrogant delusion for a single second. Forging legal documents to sell property acquired by the Department of Transportation under the laws of eminent domain was not a parental misstep. It was a calculated attack on federal infrastructure. The gavel fell with a resounding, sharp crack. Richard received a mandatory sentence of 4 years in federal prison. I sat in the back row of the gallery, my posture perfect, my expression entirely neutral, as the armed marshals escorted my father out of the courtroom. He did not look back. He had finally learned the true, irreversible cost of his arrogance. Cameron's legal fate was significantly more severe. The golden child who had built his entire identity on the illusion of technological genius sobbed openly and pathetically during his sentencing hearing. His legal defense crumbled to dust the moment the prosecutors projected his financial transaction logs onto the large courtroom monitors. Nia had provided a flawless, undeniable roadmap of his financial depravity. The judge highlighted the heavily aggravating circumstances of his crimes, ensuring no leniency would be granted. He had not only defrauded a real estate developer and the federal government, but he had actively orchestrated a lavish gala to lure innocent angel investors into a non-existent artificial intelligence startup. Furthermore, he had actively tried to launder the stolen cash through unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchanges, while putting down deposits on luxury sports cars. The sheer audacity of his boundless greed sickened the court. The judge delivered a blistering reprimand regarding his profound lack of ethics and sentenced him to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The custom-tailored suits he loved to flaunt were officially traded for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The visionary chief executive officer was now just another federal inmate assigned to a 9-digit identification number. While Richard and Cameron were locked away in federal cells, Barbara faced a completely different kind of annihilation. She had managed to avoid a direct criminal indictment for the wire fraud due to a lack of physical signatures on the federal documents, but she was left entirely unprotected against the catastrophic collateral damage. The money laundering syndicate operating under the guise of Apex Horizon Developments was not going to simply forgive and forget a $1.2 million deficit. Since they could no longer threaten me thanks to the heavy federal monitoring surrounding my business, they turned their full, unyielding wrath toward the matriarch of the family. They filed a massive, aggressive civil lawsuit against Barbara and the remaining family estate to recover their stolen funds. The syndicate employed ruthless corporate lawyers who operated with the precision of a surgical scalpel. They secured court-ordered liens against every single asset Barbara possessed. The grand illusion of her high society lifestyle was systematically dismantled piece by agonizing piece. She was forced to put the sprawling five-bedroom colonial mansion on the market. Because of the impending civil judgments and the absolute desperation for immediate liquid cash, the estate was sold at a catastrophic loss. But the money from the house was nowhere near enough to satisfy the syndicate debt and her mounting legal fees. The court ordered the complete total liquidation of her personal assets. The designer wardrobe she had flaunted at country club dinners was boxed up and sold to consignment liquidators. The vintage pearl necklaces and the heavy diamond rings she had purchased on maxed-out credit cards were seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder. The luxury vehicles parked in the driveway were swiftly repossessed by the banks. Every single tangible marker of her supposed superiority was stripped away, exposing the hollow reality beneath. She was left standing in the ruins of her own toxic ambition. With no savings, no home, and a massive remaining debt hanging over her head, Barbara had absolutely no choice but to formally declare total personal bankruptcy. The woman who had proudly called me a failure, the woman who had tried to extort me with fake schizophrenia diagnoses to steal my $5 million government payout, was now entirely destitute. She was forced to pack her remaining meager belongings into cheap cardboard boxes and move into a tiny rundown apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Her wealthy friends had completely blacklisted her, ignoring her calls and crossing the street to avoid her. Her husband and her golden child were locked in federal cages, unable to provide a single cent of support. She was completely, utterly alone. The spectacular empire of lies she had meticulously built over 3 decades had been reduced to worthless ashes. The justice system and the unforgiving financial reality she had so arrogantly mocked had finally delivered their ultimate, unavoidable verdict. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new private conservation laboratory. The space was a massive upgrade from my old studio, flooded with natural light and equipped with state-of-the-art climate control systems. I was meticulously cleaning a 17th-century oil painting using a specialized solvent when my secure private cell phone vibrated against the metal workbench. The digital screen displayed an unknown restricted number. My legal counsel had explicitly advised me to ignore unverified inbound calls following the highly publicized federal sentencing of my father and brother. However, a strange, deeply ingrained intuition compelled me to slide my finger across the glass screen. I lifted the device to my ear, but I deliberately chose to remain completely silent. I let the open line hang in the void. A ragged, wet intake of breath echoed through the tiny speaker. It was a sound entirely stripped of all former arrogance and country club pretension. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of total, unadulterated desperation. "Naomi, please do not hang up," the voice pleaded. It cracked and fractured under the weight of genuine panic. It was Barbara, the woman who used to wear heavy diamond rings and sip vintage champagne while mocking my existence, was now reduced to begging a silent phone line. "I am begging you, Naomi. You have to listen to me." I stood perfectly still, holding my specialized cleaning brush in my right hand. I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not ask how she managed to acquire this highly restricted communication channel. I simply waited, letting the heavy silence force her hand. The silence stretched until her fragile composure completely shattered. "I am living in a terrible place, Naomi," she sobbed, the words pouring out in a pathetic, chaotic rush. "It is a filthy motel right off the interstate highway. The heater is completely broken, and the carpets smell like mold and decay. The syndicate lawyers took absolutely everything I owned. They seized my offshore bank accounts and froze my credit cards. My wealthy friends will not even look at me anymore. They cross the street when they see me walking. I have nothing left. You have to help me. You have $5 million from the government buyout. You have the resources to hire better appellate lawyers for your father and Cameron. You can write official letters of leniency to the federal judge asking for a sentence reduction. You can post bail for their upcoming appeals. Please, Naomi, you are my daughter. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood to rot in a federal prison while you sit in absolute luxury." I listened to the frantic weeping of the woman who had spent 33 years systematically destroying my self-worth. She was not crying out of genuine remorse for her horrific actions. She was crying solely because she was finally experiencing the devastating consequences of her own choices. She did not apologize for forging my signature on a legal document. She did not express a single ounce of regret for threatening to lock me inside a psychiatric ward with fabricated medical records. She was only sorry that she had permanently lost her sprawling mansion, her pearls, and her golden child. She still viewed me entirely as a disposable resource to be exploited. She saw me as nothing more than a heavily funded bank account to be drained to save the exact men who had actively tried to ruin my entire life. My heart rate did not elevate a single beat. My breathing remained perfectly steady. I looked out the massive windows, watching the city traffic move far below my sanctuary. I felt absolutely nothing for the broken woman weeping on the other end of the line. There was no anger left in my veins. There was no sadness. There was no pity. There was just a profound, absolute emptiness. "Are you completely finished, Barbara?" I asked. My voice was a flat, frozen surface, devoid of any maternal affection. The sobbing abruptly stopped, replaced by a sharp, terrified intake of breath. "You called me a failure." I continued, articulating every single syllable with lethal surgical precision. "You looked me directly in the eye and told me that my career was a useless hobby. When you stole my property to fund Cameron's fraudulent artificial intelligence illusions, you justified your theft with a very specific piece of logic. You looked at me while drinking expensive wine, and you said, 'Starting a business is a big deal.' You said it was not a game." I let the words hang in the air, ensuring they cut deep into her memory. "Well, Barbara, paying the ultimate price for your own federal crimes is also a very big deal. Enjoy your new reality. Have a good life." I did not wait for her to scream. I did not wait for her to unleash a barrage of toxic curses or launch into another pathetic bout of manipulation. I simply pressed the red button and ended the call forever. The line went dead, severing the final toxic thread that bound me to my biological family. I placed the phone down on my heavy wooden workbench. I did not shed a single tear. I felt a massive, suffocating weight permanently lift off my shoulders. I immediately opened my laptop and initiated a complete digital purge. I contacted my telecommunications provider and requested an immediate permanent change to my personal and business phone numbers. I explicitly instructed them to block all incoming traffic from any unregistered contacts moving forward. I emailed my building security and updated the strict no-entry list, adding Barbara's name alongside Richard and Cameron. I instructed my legal team to automatically shred and return to sender any physical mail originating from state or federal correctional facilities. I built an impenetrable steel fortress around my peace of mind. There would be no more desperate phone calls from cheap interstate motels. There would be no tear-stained letters begging for legal salvation. The door was completely permanently locked. The family that had tried to bury me had effectively ceased to exist in my universe. They were relegated to the past, buried under the catastrophic wreckage of their own boundless greed and breathtaking arrogance. I turned my attention back to the damaged Renaissance canvas resting on my easel. The restoration process required absolute focus and a steady hand. My hands were perfectly steady. The legal severance of Nia from my biological family was an absolute masterclass in corporate and judicial efficiency. While Cameron sat in a federal penitentiary awaiting his assignment to a permanent cell block, Nia stood in a pristine downtown courthouse and officially dissolved the marriage. The divorce proceedings were swift and entirely brutal for the incarcerated tech visionary. Because Nia had possessed the extraordinary foresight to freeze all their legitimate joint accounts the very morning the federal wire fraud was exposed, the presiding judge granted her absolute control over her own financial portfolio. Cameron had attempted to argue from behind bars that he was entitled to half of her corporate assets and the equity in their luxury high-rise. The judge took one singular look at his federal indictments, his massive debts to a violent money laundering syndicate, and his horrific misuse of stolen government funds. The ruling was immediate and irrevocable. Nia walked out of that courtroom with every single cent of her clean, hard-earned wealth entirely intact. She did not lose a fraction of a percent to the man who had tried to build a fake empire. She severed the dead weight with the clinical precision of a surgeon amputating a gangrenous limb. Nia did not just survive the catastrophic implosion of my family. She weaponized the experience and turned it into an entirely new empire of her own. She formally resigned from her highly lucrative position as a chief financial officer at the major corporation where she had worked for years. She realized that she possessed a highly specialized skill set that was desperately needed in a world filled with predatory men and toxic family dynamics. Using her untouched personal capital, Nia launched a boutique financial consulting firm located in the heart of the financial district. Her new enterprise was exclusively dedicated to empowering and protecting high-net-worth women. She specialized in aggressive asset protection, corporate auditing for female entrepreneurs, and forensic accounting for women navigating high-stakes divorces against manipulative spouses. She built a fortress for women who needed to secure their financial independence and shield their wealth from the exact type of arrogance and greed that Cameron had so perfectly embodied. Her grand opening was a quiet, highly exclusive affair. I walked into her stunning new office suite carrying a carefully wrapped package. The space was a breathtaking reflection of her personality. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city, sleek minimalist furniture, and deep emerald green accents that perfectly matched the power suits she wore like armor. Nia was standing behind a massive glass desk, reviewing a digital portfolio for a new client. When she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, a genuine warm smile broke across her usually stoic face. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile without a trace of corporate guardedness or defensive tension. I placed the package on her desk and carefully peeled back the protective layers of archival tissue paper. I had spent the last 3 weeks meticulously restoring a stunning 19th century portrait of a fierce, regal woman standing at the helm of a merchant ship. It was a piece I had acquired from a private collector, and I had spent dozens of hours stripping away decades of dirt and yellowed varnish to reveal the brilliant, vibrant colors underneath. I thought your new headquarters required something that represents absolute unyielding strength, I said, sliding the framed artwork across the glass surface. Consider it a permanent reminder that the best way to deal with a sinking ship is to confidently take the wheel and steer yourself to safety. Nia looked down at the restored painting, her dark eyes reflecting a profound sense of mutual understanding. She reached out and ran her manicured fingers lightly over the ornate antique frame. "It is absolutely magnificent, Naomi," she replied, her voice softening with genuine gratitude. "It is exactly what this space needed." "And you are entirely correct. We did not just abandon a sinking ship. We completely dismantled it and used the salvaged wood to build our own respective fleets. We moved to a comfortable seating area near the expansive windows and ordered a pot of premium black coffee. We did not talk about Richard sitting in a federal prison cell. We did not discuss Barbara weeping in a cheap roadside motel. We did not waste a single breath or a single second of our valuable time on the toxic biological family that had tried to drag us both down into their miserable abyss. Instead, we talked about our business projections, our expansion strategies, and our personal goals. We talked about art and finance, and the sheer intoxicating thrill of absolute autonomy. Sitting across from Nia, I experienced a profound internal shift. For 33 years, I had been desperately searching for validation from a family that was biologically incapable of providing it. I had endured decades of emotional abuse and gaslighting because society conditions us to believe that blood relations are sacred and unbreakable. I had falsely believed that being a sister and a daughter meant quietly absorbing the pain inflicted by the people who shared my genetic code. Nia shattered that entire toxic ideology. She had walked into my apartment when I was cornered by federal investigations and organized crime, and she had handed me the exact financial weapons I needed to save my own life. She did not do it out of familial obligation. She did it out of mutual respect and a shared absolute intolerance for manipulative parasites. As we drank our coffee and mapped out our respective futures, I realized I had not lost a family at all. I had simply shed a heavy, suffocating burden. In the wreckage of that grand illusion, I had found something infinitely more valuable. I had found a chosen family. Nia was no longer just the woman who had mistakenly married my idiot brother. She was my closest ally, my fiercest defender, and my true sister in every single way that actually mattered. We were bound not by the chaotic accident of birth, but by the deliberate, conscious choice to support, protect, and elevate each other. We had forged a bond in the fires of an absolute crisis, and it had cooled into an unbreakable steel foundation. The blood of the covenant had proven to be incredibly thicker than the water of the womb. I left Nia's office that afternoon, feeling an overwhelming sense of clarity and purpose. I walked down the bustling city streets, surrounded by the chaotic energy of the metropolis, and I did not feel a single ounce of fear or hesitation. I was surrounded by a network of people who genuinely respected my talent and valued my presence. I had a brilliant, fiercely loyal sister who would stand by my side in any boardroom or courtroom. I had effectively cured the disease that had infected my life since childhood. The surgical extraction was painful, and the recovery required absolute isolation from the source of the infection, but the patient had completely survived. Now it was finally time to collect the ultimate reward for my resilience and build my own empire. The official notification arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 8 months after my family orchestrated their own spectacular demise. I was sitting at my temporary workbench when my encrypted laptop chimed with a priority alert from my banking institution. It was a formal digital confirmation from the United States Department of Transportation. The bureaucratic machinery of the federal government had finally concluded its extensive administrative process. The eminent domain compensation package had been fully authorized, cleared, and dispersed. I opened the secure financial portal and watched the screen load. $5 million had just been seamlessly transferred into my corporate account. It was entirely clean, fully taxed, and legally indisputable. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. This was the exact fortune my father had forged a legal document to steal. This was the wealth my mother had attempted to seize by threatening me with fake psychiatric evaluations. This was the capital my arrogant brother had desperately needed to fund his catastrophic artificial intelligence illusion. They had burned their entire lives to the ground, chasing the ghost of a fraction of this money. Now they were wearing government-issued uniforms in federal penitentiaries and sleeping in cheap roadside motels, while I sat in absolute tranquility, possessing the entire fortune they had murdered their reputations to obtain. I did not use the $5 million to buy a flashy sports car or a massive depreciating mansion. I did not need to project a fake image of success to impress shallow country club associates. I used the capital to solidify an empire that nobody could ever take away from me. Within 2 weeks, I finalized the purchase of a breathtaking commercial property in the heart of the most prestigious historical arts district on the East Coast. It was a massive multi-level facility with soaring ceilings and reinforced architectural bones. I hired the best contractors in the city to gut the interior and rebuild it to my exacting specifications. I did not just build a new studio, I built the premier art conservation and restoration center on the entire eastern seaboard. The facility was a masterpiece of modern scientific engineering and historical preservation. I installed multi-million-dollar climate control systems that regulated the humidity and temperature down to the microscopic percentile. I imported massive custom-built vacuum hot tables from Europe for canvas realignments. I purchased state-of-the-art infrared reflectography scanners and ultraviolet luminescence imaging equipment to peer through centuries of paint and varnish. I transformed the building into a highly secure, heavily fortified fortress of art conservation. The security protocols rivaled those of national museums, complete with biometric scanners and a 24-hour armed security detail. When the doors of my new conservation center officially opened, the response from the global art community was overwhelming. Billionaire private collectors, elite auction houses, and curators from international museums immediately transferred their most priceless artifacts into my care. They did not care about the malicious internet rumors my brother had tried to spread. They only cared about the pristine, unmatched quality of my work and the absolute security of my new fortress. My client waiting list expanded from 6 months to 2 full years within the first week of operation. I hired a team of brilliant, dedicated assistant conservators to help manage the massive influx of restoration contracts. I was no longer just a solitary artist working in a dusty warehouse. I was the chief executive officer of a highly lucrative, highly respected enterprise. I was generating wealth and preserving global history, while the people who had called my career a useless coloring book project spent their days adhering to strict prison schedules and eating cafeteria food. The ultimate revenge was not a screaming match in a courtroom or a vindictive letter sent to a jail cell. The ultimate revenge was simply existing in a realm of success that they could never possibly touch. They had demanded that I be realistic. I had been realistic. I had calculated the trajectory of their boundless greed, stepped out of their destructive path, and allowed their own monumental arrogance to drag them straight into the abyss. It was a bright, beautifully clear Friday morning when I finally took a moment to absorb the absolute magnitude of my victory. I walked into my private executive laboratory on the top floor of the conservation center. The space was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire room, outfitted with specialized transparent films to filter out any damaging ultraviolet light. The morning sun poured through the glass, bathing the pristine white floors and the heavy steel workbenches in a warm golden glow. I walked over to my professional espresso machine and brewed a fresh double shot. The rich, dark aroma of roasted coffee beans mingled perfectly with the faint, clean scent of natural pine resin and purified solvents. It was the scent of my independence. It was the aroma of absolute total control. I held the warm ceramic cup in my hand and walked over to a heavy wooden easel positioned in the center of the sunlight. Resting on the easel was a newly acquired 17th century masterpiece. It was a portrait of a woman standing tall amidst a violent raging storm, her eyes fixed firmly on the horizon. The canvas was heavily damaged by centuries of neglect, covered in layers of dark yellowed grime and aggressive microfractures. Most people would look at it and see only a ruined, worthless piece of fabric. But I did not see a ruined canvas. I saw the vibrant, brilliant colors waiting to be meticulously freed from the darkness. I saw the absolute potential hidden beneath the surface. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my espresso. I looked around my sprawling, multi-million-dollar laboratory. I listened to the quiet hum of the climate control systems and the distant, muffled sounds of my employees expertly managing my thriving enterprise. I was 33 years old. I was entirely free of the toxic, suffocating weight of a biologically inherited nightmare. I had a brilliant, fiercely loyal sister in Nia, who was building her own financial consulting empire right across the city. I had wealth, respect, and an unshakable foundation. I set my espresso cup down on a nearby metal tray and gently picked up a specialized cleaning swab. I looked at the fierce woman painted on the canvas, and I smiled. A genuine warm smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I was not the family disappointment. I was not a frivolous girl playing with old paint. I was the undeniable architect of my own extraordinary destiny. I raised my hand, applied the solvent to the dark canvas, and began the beautiful, meticulous work of bringing the masterpiece back to life. The story of Naomi teaches us a profound lesson about the true definition of family and the undeniable power of knowing your own worth. For decades, she was told she was a failure simply because she did not fit into her parents' toxic and materialistic narrative. They weaponized their shared blood to demand her unwavering loyalty, while simultaneously stealing her livelihood to fund their golden child. But her journey proves that biology does not give anyone a free pass to exploit or abuse you. True family is not determined by the accident of birth. It is built on mutual respect, genuine support, and shared values, just like the unbreakable sisterhood she forged with Nia in the middle of an absolute crisis. When you are surrounded by narcissistic individuals who constantly try to diminish your light, the most powerful response is not to scream or beg for their validation. The ultimate victory is establishing absolute ironclad boundaries and stepping completely out of their destructive path. You do not always need to seek active revenge against those who maliciously wrong you. Sometimes you just need to stand your ground and watch as their own blinding arrogance and bottomless greed drag them straight into the abyss. Naomi did not burn her family to the ground. She simply stopped protecting them from the devastating consequences of their own catastrophic choices. Her triumph reminds us all that you never need the approval of toxic people to build an extraordinary life. When you stop trying to fix broken relatives and start investing that energy into your own raw potential, you become entirely untouchable. Your massive success, your profound inner peace, and your absolute independence will always be the loudest and most devastating response to anyone who ever dared to call you a disappointment. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, let us know your story in the comments below, and do not forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more empowering journeys of survival and ultimate success.